Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we are handing you the literal blueprint to become the conscious architect of your own mind. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to know exactly why learning feels so incredibly frustrating, how to biologically hack that exact frustration, and the real-time tools to calm a totally fried nervous system. We are unpacking a TEDx talk by brain researcher Dr. Laura Boyd and a really massive, fascinating interview with neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Yeah, and it's a ton of ground to cover, but the payoff is just huge.
It really is. And hey, real quick, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to actually understand reshaping the brain, we have to kill off this myth that, pretty much all of us grew up with, the whole fixed adult brain thing.
Right, the idea that you just stop developing.
Exactly.
For decades, science basically told us that neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to physically change, was just for kids. Like your brain is a sponge until you hit your early 20s, and then boom.
The concrete dries.
Exactly, the concrete dries. From then on, you supposedly just slowly lose brain cells. But Dr. Laura Boyd's lab completely destroys this idea. Your brain is actually actively reshaping itself right now, literally in this exact second as you are listening to us.
Which is a huge relief for anyone feeling like their mental software is just totally outdated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of how it happens are what's really fascinating. Boyd breaks it down into 3 specific ways the brain changes. The first is chemical, and this happens almost instantaneously.
Right, because the brain runs on those electrical impulses and chemical signals.
Yeah, exactly. So when you try to learn a new skill or memorize something, your brain rapidly floods specific neurons with these neurotransmitters. It's a super fast response, but it is entirely tied to short-term memory.
I always picture the chemical change like writing a quick reminder on a sticky note.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because it's convenient in the moment, but super fragile. You study a new language for an hour, you feel like a genius, and then you wake up the next day and stumble over every single word.
Yeah, the sticky note just blows away in the wind.
Because maintaining those high chemical levels takes a massive amount of energy, right?
Yeah, and the brain is incredibly cheap with its energy. It just won't do it unless you force it to. So to make a skill stick, you need the second type of plasticity, which is structural change.
The actual rewiring.
Exactly. Neurons physically grow new connections, synapses get stronger, the physical architecture of the brain changes for long-term memory.
So if the chemical change is a sticky note, structural change is like pulling permits and actually building a whole new permanent wing on your house.
Yes.
It takes way more heavy lifting, but the room is yours to keep.
And if you build enough of those rooms, you hit the third type, which is functional change. That is when entire networks in the brain shift and become hyper-efficient. Boyd gives this amazing example of Braille readers. The sensory areas in their brains that process touch from their hands are physically much larger.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, or London taxi drivers. They spend years memorizing that insane, chaotic street map of London, and brain scans show their hippocampi, the spatial memory center, literally expand.
That is just wild to me. Their physical brain bulks up in those specific spots. But wait, this brings up a massive friction point. If our brains are this beautifully adaptable organ, why does it feel so impossibly hard to learn a new language or, pick up the piano after age 25?
Well, this is where Dr. Andrew Huberman's work perfectly connects to Boyd's. Up to about age 25, your neuroplasticity is essentially passive. A toddler doesn't sit down and study grammar, right? They just absorb it.
Right, they're just little sponges.
But after your mid-20s, evolution assumes you're done. You are a capable adult. Thinking hard burns calories, so the adult brain wants to put everything on autopilot to save energy for survival.
It aggressively protects its automated routines.
Exactly. It does not want to change. So to force structural change, to build that new wing, you had to pry open this biological gate. And that requires a very specific and incredibly uncomfortable neurochemical cocktail.
And Huberman gives us the exact formula for this. First, you need acetylcholine.
Yeah, acetylcholine acts like a high-powered spotlight in the brain. When you hyper-focus on a spreadsheet or a guitar chord, it chemically marks those exact neurons. It tells the construction crew, hey, we need to work right here later.
But the spotlight isn't enough on its own. If it was, we'd all just calmly read books and absorb everything perfectly.
Right, you need the catalyst.
Which is norepinephrine, basically adrenaline in the brain. It causes agitation, alertness, and just this deep sense of friction.
The brain needs urgency. Without that norepinephrine spike, the brain looks at the spotlight and just says, well, this isn't life or death, so I'm ignoring it. You need the stress of the struggle to signal that an upgrade is mandatory.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. We are so obsessed with this modern self-help idea of being in the flow state.
Oh, the flow state myth, yes.
Right. We expect our best work to feel magical and effortless, but the science completely flips that. It implies that when we start a tough task, we are supposed to feel annoyed and stressed out.
What's fascinating here is how wrong we've been about high performance. Huberman goes after this flow obsession pretty hard. That awful frustration you feel when staring at a blank page, that isn't a sign you lack talent or that you're doing it wrong.
It's literally just the norepinephrine kicking in.
Yes, it is a biological prerequisite.
Which makes so much sense of our behavior. When I hit that wall of frustration and suddenly want to stand up and clean my perfectly clean kitchen.
Right, you're looking for an escape hatch.
Exactly. My brain desperately wants a cheap dopamine hit to escape the adrenaline spike.
But you have to wade through it. Boyd's laboratory data backs this up perfectly with stroke patients. She found that increasing the struggle during physical rehab directly leads to way more structural brain change. If the practice is easy, the brain doesn't bother rewiring.
So the frustration is actually the biological warm-up.
Exactly. Frustration is not a signal of failure. But obviously, wading through that friction is exhausting. Your brain is screaming at you to quit.
So how do we actually sustain that extreme effort without just rage quitting?
That is where the brain's internal reward system comes in, specifically dopamine. And Huberman's own personal story is the perfect example of this. People see him now as this polished Stanford neuroscientist.
But his background is wild. Listening to him describe his youth was jarring. He was basically a feral teenager in San Francisco in the 90s.
Running with the EMB skater crowd, total chaos, truancy, getting locked up in youth detention. He was on a really bad trajectory.
Yeah, he said he used the sheer terror of ending up in prison to force himself into action. He would sit in a chair and study for hours, refusing to move no matter how much his body screamed at him. He essentially hijacked his own neuroplasticity.
He did. But the chemical mechanism that let him endure that agonizing friction wasn't just fear. It was dopamine.
Which sounds completely backward to how we talk about dopamine today. We only ever hear about dopamine detoxes. It's just the junk food chemical from social media.
Yeah, pop culture totally flattened our understanding of dopamine. Evolution didn't make this powerful neuromodulator just to reward you for eating a cupcake. Dopamine is an evolutionary driver. It gets released when you hit a milestone on the right path.
Like a thirsty animal wandering through the woods.
Yes. The animal is exhausted, its adrenaline is peaking, it's about to collapse. But the second it catches the scent of water, long before it actually takes a drink, it gets a hit of dopamine.
And what does that do biologically in that moment?
It chemically suppresses the adrenaline, it pushes down the stress, and gives the animal the forward propulsion to keep walking toward the stream.
It's literally like finding a save point in a really brutal video game.
Exactly.
Your health bar is flashing red, you're about to lose, you hit the checkpoint, you hear the chime, and your frustration meter just resets. You get an extra life to keep playing.
That is precisely how the neurochemistry functions. When you exert intense effort, noradrenaline builds up in your brainstem. It's an internal quick counter. When it gets too high, it shuts down your cognitive drive. You literally give up. But when you solve one small problem, you trigger a pulse of dopamine. That knocks the noradrenaline back down, widening the gap before you hit the quit point.
This brings up that crazy intense story about David Goggins and the virtual reality Shark Tank.
Oh, yes. That perfectly validates this.
They knew Goggins was absolutely terrified of sharks. And what does he do when he realizes the test?
He didn't hesitate or try to calm his thoughts down. He instantly volunteered to go first and stepped right into the simulation. He moved forward into the fear.
Because action precedes mood. If you wait around to feel motivated, you will wait forever.
Which is why both Huberman and Boyd fiercely argue that behavior drives plasticity.
Yeah.
When you feel paralyzed, the default assumption is that you need to fix your mindset first. That if you just think positively, you'll feel better and then act.
But you cannot control your thoughts with your thoughts. It's like trying to grab smoke.
You really can't. You have to physically move forward or start the very first step of a task to trigger the dopamine circuitry and suppress the paralysis.
Okay, so that handles intense focus and learning. But what about when the stress isn't about a difficult project? What about just the sheer crushing overwhelm of daily life? Back-to-back Zoom meetings, Slack notifications going off, the news cycle. How do we biologically pull the emergency brake?
That profound exhaustion comes from what Huberman calls DPO analysis.
Right.
Duration, path, and outcome.
Right.
Your brain is constantly calculating How long is this meeting going to last? What exact steps do I do right now? What is the expected result? Running those DPO calculations is metabolically expensive. It drains massive amounts of neural energy.
He also talked about impatience, which completely changed how I view frustration. He defined impatience as a mismatch between your internal metronome and the outside world.
Yeah, your interoception. Your brain's perception of your heart rate and breathing is ticking frantically at a 10, but the reality of the external world, like the grocery store line you were stuck in, is moving at a 2.
And that mismatch is agonizing. Our biology is primed for action, but we have to be still. And we always think we need a 3-week vacation to fix it, but he gave us this physiological tool that works in real time, the physiological sigh.
It is the ultimate real-time tool. 2 rapid inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long, slow exhale through the mouth.
I started doing this, and it feels like a total cheat code. But why does that specific pattern work so much better than just taking a deep breath?
The mechanics are beautifully elegant. Inside your lungs, you have millions of tiny little air sacs. When you get stressed, your breathing gets shallow, and those sacs collapse and stick shut.
Which traps carbon dioxide in your bloodstream.
Exactly. And high CO2 signals the brain to increase panic and agitation. The double inhale mechanically pops those little sacs back open. Then the long exhale actively offloads all that CO2. It literally forces your parasympathetic nervous system, the calm down system, to engage instantly.
And he also tied stress to our visual field, which honestly I had never even considered. When we stare intently at a screen, our pupils dilate and our visual field narrows. It's like putting your brain in portrait mode.
Because evolutionarily, narrow focal vision is designed for hunting or assessing a threat. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, dripping adrenaline into your system to keep you hyper alert. But you can hack this simply by changing how your eyes interact with space.
By using panoramic vision, right?
Yes, just consciously expanding your gaze, look out a window toward the horizon. It tells your brainstem there are no predators around. It shuts off the alertness circuit and immediately slows down your perception of time.
So if you are drowning in emails, feeling totally paralyzed, you don't actually need to quit your job and run to the woods. You literally just need to look out a window, widen your gaze, and take a double inhale.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's profound. Huberman notes that extreme states of distress, like trauma or addiction, are essentially extreme forms of cognitive and visual myopia. You become entirely fixated on the stressor. Using your diaphragm and your panoramic vision gives you a biological lever to physically pull yourself out of that narrow stress state.
Okay, so we've mapped out the agitation for focus, the dopamine to keep us moving, and the real-time tools to calm down. But looking at all this neuroplasticity science, there is a massive paradox sitting right in the middle of it.
You mean the timing of the actual physical change in the brain?
Yes. You put in all this brutal effort, you push through the norepinephrine friction, you hold the acetylcholine spotlight steady, but the physical rewiring of the brain does not happen while you are doing the hard work.
It absolutely does not. The intense focus and struggle merely mark the synapses. They put up the chemical sticky notes. But the literal structural change building, the new neural architecture, only occurs during states of deep rest, mostly during deep sleep.
Which completely reframes the purpose of sleep. It isn't just downtime. It is the biological construction crew arriving for the night shift to build the new wing on your house.
Exactly. If you don't sleep, the crew never shows up, and the chemical sticky notes just blow away. To solidify what you learned, you have to entirely uncouple your brain from space and time. Turn off those DPO calculations.
But for people who struggle to get 8 hours of perfect sleep, Huberman offered a lot of hope with NSDR, right?
Non-sleep deep rest,
Yeah.
yes. Practices like yoga nidra or clinical hypnosis, you enter profound physiological relaxation while keeping just a tiny sliver of conscious attention.
He also brought up EMDR therapy in this context, which blew my mind because I've always assumed it was a bit pseudoscientific. The idea that moving your eyes side to side can cure psychological trauma sounds almost absurd.
It does, until you understand the evolutionary biology beneath it. EMDR relies on lateral eye movements. When you move your eyes side to side, you neurologically mimic the visual experience of forward walking. It's called optic flow.
And we just talked about how forward movement suppresses the fear response.
Exactly. Evolutionarily, if an animal is moving forward, it is not frozen in terror. So creating optic flow naturally quiets the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. It lowers the internal alarm system so you can process traumatic memories in a state of physical safety.
So what this all implies for our daily lives is that technically taking a nap, doing a yoga nidra protocol, or just staring blankly at the horizon on a walk is highly productive work.
This raises an important question about how our culture values time. We intensely glorify the hustle and the grind, but deliberately turning off your analytical brain is biologically necessary. If you only ever grind and never deeply rest, you constantly generate the chemical signals for change, but you never actually allow the structural changes to take root. You are wasting your own effort.
That is an incredibly powerful reframe. Okay, let's bring all of this together. Learning requires the chemical agitation of focus. Frustration is the biological warm-up, not the enemy. You have to move forward physically to get the dopamine hit that suppresses the urge to quit. You can use the physiological sigh and panoramic vision to instantly reset your nervous system. And finally, deep rest is the actual builder of your brain.
It is an intensely empowering set of facts. You have the actual, tangible tools to shape your own biology.
You really do. You are not stuck with the brain you woke up with today. Every struggle at work, every focused effort, and every deliberate moment of deep rest is physically reshaping your neural architecture.
And I think there's one final lingering thought we should leave you to mull over. Dr. Boyd noted something quite striking. She said the brain is shaped structurally by everything you do, but it is equally shaped by everything you don't do.
Oh, wow. That is heavy.
Your brain is constantly, ruthlessly wiring itself based on your daily habits. So the ultimate question becomes, if your brain is always adapting to what you give it, what invisible neural structures are you unknowingly building right now with your daily defaults?